it was a process of dialogue and conversation about what's going on in England around what do we mean by transformative learning. And from my own particular position, as also being Professor of Global Education here, I've been involved in setting up an international network called ANGEL, Academic Network in Global Education and Learning. And one of the big discussions in that network has been around all these international initiatives around that make reference to words like transformation, but actually they're not very rarely defined or clarified. You know, UNESCO produced a number of reports. Some research centre here works quite closely with the Global Education Network Europe, and they are starting to use some of this language. So we wanted to go beyond just what does that actually mean in practice. And that also led us to think about the ways in which a lot of civil society organisations, some of whom are represented here today, also their engagement in education is often for a transformative reason, because they're wanting to see change. And I think we then started that whole process of talking amongst us, finding out what we saw as particularly the areas that we felt were important to focus on. And to me, as this point before I pass on to Kathy, is to say that it's important that when we start to use some of these conversations and language, that we be very clear about what we mean by that. At the moment, in the sort of political context we're living in, some of these things may look a bit challenging and a bit difficult, but actually, more closer you get to dialogue with teachers and young people, you find actually what you're thinking about, talking about, has relevance and they wish to engage in that. And so I think, and I should be saying a little bit more about it later, if most of you are able to stay for the book launch, when we talk more about the current global context, in the sense in which where we see our space, and therefore to me I think when we talk about the things that we believe are important for education, we not only clarify what we mean by that, but we provide evidence to back it up. And one of the big challenges we've had in England is that there's been a number of international policy statements that make reference to things like transformation, global citizenship and sustainability, but they actually haven't been noticed or taken up by policymakers. And I've been working with a number of people in this room for a publication group was launched last year called The Case for Global Learning, which was particularly aimed at influencing parliamentarians around some of these themes, and you just get blank faces. And I think we've got a long way to go. So therefore, the more that we can do, not just to do reports like this, but actually get them out there so people can use them and pass them on to teachers, but also to use them as a tool for your own educational work. So that's my sense of context, and I'll pass on to Kathy to say a bit more about
Thank
what's in
you,
it.
that's great. If we can just move on. That would be helpful.
Yes, you can.
That's great, okay. So some of the key elements, it's difficult to describe the whole report, it's quite long, you might not do it all in one sitting, but some of the key things that were really important was, as Doug's just been saying, to really interrogate this term, transformative learning. It's bandied around all over the place in many settings, so to really ask critical questions about that. It also attempts to synthesize some of the research, the most sort of esteemed and robust research on transformative learning, and bring that into a kind of digestible picture. The examples of practice and transformative learning processes are really key, and this is where we had lots of our conversations when we were preparing the report, was how is this done in practice? And what came out of the case studies of those that submitted examples of practice were these sort of key ideas and threads that came across. So it really aimed to gather some of the transformative examples of practice across our shared world and try and look at those together and identify commonalities. It also attempts to look at enabling conditions and things for focus and development. So we all need to know what that means. That means the challenges, the difficult bits that are perhaps in many ways even more important to focus on than the successes and the things that are being done well. And its ultimate aim is to support educators, but also, as Doug was saying, to try and inform policy a little bit. So I'm not going to dig too deep into, yeah, that's right, thank you. So I'm not going to dig too deep into these, but it was just to sort of give a nod to the foundational, theoretical approaches that really informed our discussions and the shaping of this report. So a lot of the work draws on the work of Stephen Sterling and his orders of learning, and I'm sure I'm explaining this to people who are already very familiar with it, but if you're not, it's just this idea that first order changes around efficiency and effectiveness within an organisation or an intervention. He then distinguishes a second order, which is more about examining and changing assumptions, so going from doing things better to doing better things. But this is the area that we really want to be focusing on, this idea of changing the mindset of the learner, really changing the way that, that we see things in order to enact that social change. So Stephen Sterling's work is, I think, a sort of core golden thread through the report. We also focus a lot on this idea of the liminal state, the rub, the difficulty, that challenging area where we go from a sort of learned or understood or normative behaviour to a desired new one, and this challenging, difficult emotional state in the middle that is so important. So Meserow calls this a cognitive dissonance, but it's this idea of a difficult, tricky spot when we're talking about transformative learning. That transformation from one side to the other is difficult and messy and needs care and attention. And the last one that helped inform a lot of the way that we looked at things was this idea of transgressive learning, actively challenging the power structures and the structures around which our transformative learning is taking place. So together with vowel symbols. So just those ones. The next slide is my favourite slide, because this is where I get to say thank you. The case studies that we had from people were fabulous and a really, really rich range of things. So from Thoughtbox, which Holly is working with, and Rachel Musson, and the Global Learning Programme that Clive's working with. Global Action Plan. Claire didn't make it today, she was unwell, but Claire and Morgan and others working on this. The Museum of Climate Hope is my co-author Bill Finnegan, who works at Oxford Museum with this digital trail across the libraries and museums of Oxford. Jan, who's here. Is she here today? Did she make it? No? Okay. Jan, who works with P4C, the Country Trust, Seeds, Changemakers and Young Changemakers courses, and Catalyse Change, who run big camps for non-binary 18 to 25 girls. So just massive thank you to all of those people. And this is where the transformative learning examples were drawn from.
Okay. So obviously one of the things was mentioned we tried to draw together was what are some of the commonalities in this process of transformative learning. So obviously a key starting point is enabling self-awareness and critical reflection, and as the diagram showed there before, quite often some sort of cognitive dissonance, something where you, have to rethink maybe your perspectives. And then engaging in sustainability values and competencies, that you need knowledge, you need skills, but you also need values, and running those all together is developing the competencies. And then fostering collaboration, and again, moving from individual to collective relational learning. And obviously that's quite challenging. We live in a very individualistic, atomized society, so this idea of actually moving from seeing yourself as an individual in the learning process to this collective and relational learning. And then finally, nurturing agency through authentic, real-world, action-orientated learning. And this is really important again, and this idea again that it's by putting these things into practice, the knowledge, the skills, the values, and this actually in real world circumstances with others, that actually makes you action competent. Okay, next one please. However, obviously we identified some challenges. As Doug's alluded to, there's a danger of lip service and term becomes meaningless, at the worst transformation wishing or transformation washing. Interestingly, Jenny, who can't be here, Bath Spa University were recently inspected by Ofsted, and she said they heard them using the term transformative learning. If she was here, I'd be interested to know what they understand by that. But I'd be very surprised if any teacher trainers were managing that process with the rather Stalinist core curriculum framework that they have to teach. Then there's obviously the complex underrepresented role of emotions, and again, this is an area that we feel, we point out actually probably needs more examination, and there's things like the climate emotions wheel and things like that which are quite useful, but we think that needs to be better foregrounded. There's the current political context, obviously, globally, the assault on things like EDI, climate science, etc. You know, the government is sort of trying to navigate this, but we look at the curriculum review we'll come to, which already foregrounded the idea that it was going to be evolution, not revolution, and a considerable number of us think it should be the latter. And obviously our shared world has much to offer to role model the potential for transformative education. And that's what we feel. Obviously we have over 350 organisations in the coalition now, and it obviously the main purpose is this sort of campaigning towards SDG 4.7. But there are a lot of organisations within it that are actually engaged in training and projects around transformative learning. So we're hoping that this report will help people to get a better handle on it, but also be able to come forward and say, yes, we can offer this to educators. And finally, as Doug talked about, there's a need to be more proactive in demonstrating evidence of impact. So anyway, you've all got it down. Hope you enjoy it. And any questions?
Can I just add one thing I forgot to add? Dr. Claire Lee is here as well. It was one of the case studies, I don't know why, but I think it was in the middle there. So Our World, Our Futures was as well an amazing project with kids in the Maldives and kids in Oxford exchanging visions of their desired futures in a way, wasn't it? So thank you very much for that. So.